This is Gene DeLisio with a featured sports interview from WDLB and WOSQ. One of the most celebrated sports figures in Marshfield, Wisconsin history is Bob Koch, who played high school sports at Columbus High School between 1962 and 1965. On the football field during 3 years of varsity competition, Bob ran for 2,830 yards and 30 touchdowns. In basketball, he scored 1,633 points in 4 seasons with the Dons. We had the chance some years ago to sit down with Bob Koch and talk about his career in Marshfield and at Columbus High School. All right, Bob, first of all, I think we'll open with kind of a general question. As you look back on your career, what you accomplished at Columbus High School, do you have any thoughts about your athletic career and some of those accomplishments that you had?
No, I don't think I'd change anything. I think that some of those accomplishments, though, had to do with 2 factors, and that is that I had good coaching. I had good coaching in Coach Kroll and Coach Olson in the sports there, and of course Coach Kroll also was in track. And I think I had some very understanding athletes to play with, because I know at times that it seemed like, I was always in the headlines and stuff like that, and it took some real character athletes, I think, to stand there and accept that, and still continue to block for you or pass you the ball in basketball and that. So looking back, I think that the credit has to go to my teammates and good coaching. I had good coaching, there's no doubt.
You came to Columbus High School, Bob, and made some big contributions to their athletic program right away. Can you talk about the years before you got to Columbus and what prepared you to make those contributions right away on the Columbus sports scene?
Yeah, I think some of the early coaching that I had even before high school in Dell and Jack Conity made a big difference at Our Lady of Peace. They were volunteer coaches, but they understood the game very well. And I think that they prepared me for the style of play. I know that Dell Conity took a lot of time to watch Columbus athletics, to watch what Columbus was being taught the players were, and he tried to prepare us for that already down in the grade school. And in basketball, I remember starting as soon as 5th and 6th grade. I was playing competitively, and I think my size helped there too. I was pretty grown up at that time, so I was able to always play a class ahead or something, just because physically I was bigger. But that allowed me to play good competition earlier in my life, and that makes a difference as well when you can go up against good competition early in your life. And in football, again, my size was a factor. I think in 7th and 8th grade already, I was 175, 180 pounds. And so with the ability to run in that, that's a big kid to play football in 7th and 8th grade. And so those factors helped me mature. And I think that my parents had a lot to do with it as well, is that they kept everything in perspective for me. I did have incentive with my brother being ahead of me, so I wanted to be able to play with him, and I had the fortune of doing that in both basketball and football. So I had many, again, good opportunities, and I think that has to do with a lot of what takes place in a person's life, is that if the opportunity and the chances are there, they fit into place. And some kids have a lot of this talent, but the opportunity doesn't always exist for them, and so they go by the wayside. So I think that's important.
Bob, back in that era, was there a great effort on the part of the staff at the grade schools to work in concert with Columbus High School in terms of athletics and what they did and how they ran things?
I think so. I think that Sacred Heart, St. John's, and Our Lady of Peace at that time was working real hard to try to provide an atmosphere in athletics that would be acceptable at Columbus High School, knowing that a lot more kids would go to Columbus High School than there are today, and they work very hard to prepare kids for that level, not only, I think, in athletics, but in the classroom. And so I think that, there was a great deal of emphasis in the 3 Catholic grade schools to prepare all the kids that came from there, like Tom Knauf and I think the Pushners that came out of Sacred Heart, and that all were kind of prepared, and that we would all come together once as a team. In grade school we played against each other, but when we came together, Lloyd Huffman and Tom Knauf and all of us, it made for good athletic programs. It really did.
Well, you came to Columbus and made some contributions almost right away. First of all, we understand that you were not able to contribute the way you would like during your freshman football season. Can you talk about that incident?
Right. I was, again, having the opportunity to play on the varsity team at that time. And we went to a scrimmage just before our first game. And I went out for a pass, and my brother threw me the pass, and I was tackled, and I broke a leg, the tibial bone on my lower leg. So that set me back for my freshman year in football. And but it also helped me mature. I think it kept things in perspective. It made me realize that, that it is a game, and it also made me work harder the next years that came along. I think I appreciated the game more my sophomore and junior and senior year because of that incident. So that was set me back a little bit in football that freshman year.
Would that have been highly unusual for a freshman to play varsity ball right away?
I think so. I think other kids, I don't know totally what happens, but I don't think as many kids in freshman sports were playing on varsity teams as they are today. The camps that started after I actually got out of high school actually prepare some kids for the ability to play as a freshman on varsity teams. But in those days, it was pretty hard to do that. Opportunity has to be there too. Some teams that are weaker, needing more players, had to look to their freshmen. But actually, Columbus had the numbers already. They really had numbers out for football. Gordy Clay was coaching at that time. And so it would have maybe been unusual. And I would have been happy if it would have happened, but it didn't happen. I think it would have been an exception.
I had a chance a couple of years ago to spend some time with Coach Clay and get his thoughts about Columbus football and his football career. And although you didn't spend a whole lot of time playing for him, what was that like, that experience of playing for Coach Clay?
It was an experience that was good. He was a physical coach. I mean, he liked to play the game physically. I mean, he wasn't afraid to take it at a team physically, where I think Coach Kroll was a finesse coach. He used a lot of trap blocks and things like that, where Coach Clay had a strong power offense, things like this that he ran. And he didn't accept too many mistakes either, but it was more of a physical play that I remember. I mean, we had to block harder. The game was played more between the tackles. Reverses and that really didn't exist a lot. It was straight out good football, and maybe that also helped me down the road when I went to college, because I had learned some blocking techniques and that even before Coach Kroll came.
As a person, what was Coach Clay like? Was he a guy the players enjoyed playing for?
I think that I always said that all the coaches I had were exceptional people, and I think he was also. But I think his level of tolerance was a little different than Coach Kroll's. He expected perfection every play, and that's all right too. And sometimes that upset him very much if it wasn't. But it makes character too. I think today's coaches and today's parents are different than parents and players then and coaches then. And as parents in that, they accept it more. That today, I think that some parents resent that type of coaching, but it does teach you good discipline. It teaches that you are part of a team and that you have to execute. And if you break down in your block, the team isn't going to succeed. And he pretty much taught that philosophy. So it's a good philosophy. If you're going to play a team sport, you have to execute.
Well, although you didn't play any varsity ball as a freshman, you did play varsity basketball. And tell us about that experience and the type of season you had.
When I played as a freshman on basketball, I believe that I actually came off the bench. I can't remember. I did start a couple of games, I think, because of injuries and that, but I came off the bench pretty much playing. I played in the guard court, which is not where I played my junior and senior year. So I learned to play the game my first couple years in high school facing the basket, which is quite different than with your back to the basket. I played with some very good players at that time. I believe the Great House boys were in there, and Dumas was in there, Mike Dumas. My brother Chuck was there. So I had other kids that surrounded me that were good athletes at that time. Those were good classes of athletes as well. And that took a lot of pressure off me, and I think allowed me to develop some of my skills, some of the shots that I had. People were more concerned with guarding Mike Dumas at that time. Chuck scored very well. the Great House. I think they're brothers. Again, there was 2 sets of brothers and that. So I think that opened the door for me to get a good experience with not a lot of pressure. And that's something, too. When you get on the floor as a freshman and you see a lot of pressure, that's different because you don't always get to develop as well. So the opportunity, again, was there. And that's the key. The opportunity was there.
Bob, you're coaching basketball now, doing some coaching in the Tomahawk girls program. Are there a lot of changes from what you saw and what you played in 40 years ago to the way the game has evolved today?
Right. I think that the whole tempo of the game has increased. I think the talent of players are more balanced. If you get a player that's scoring 14, 15 points a game, that is an exceptional player nowadays. When you look back at the records and statistics, both in girls, we didn't have girls then, but in boys basketball, but girls starting out, it wasn't uncommon for a player to be up in the mid-20s. But you don't see that too often now. And I think that's all because of the camps and the balance that coaches expect and the quality of defense that's stressed. Defense is really stressed. They've learned how to take away certain players. They've learned how to rotate better in defenses. Certain zones can be now put on the floor that, you played a straight zone, now you can have matchup zones. I mean, the whole level of the game has increased, which created 2 things. It takes away the individual a little bit who shines, and it forces a team to play as a team. And so scoring is balanced more. Maybe the style of play also cuts down on the score, that overall score.
Let's talk about your sophomore year playing football at Columbus, and here you finally got some action in, and your ball club went 6-2 and had a pretty good season. Anything in particular about your sophomore year you remember?
I think some of the biggest things that took place there in my sophomore year is that I had a chance to play with my brother. I was looking forward to doing that my freshman year, and that didn't happen there in football. And I remember that at that time, I believe that Tom Knopf had already broken into the lineup. Lloyd Huffman was in the lineup already, and myself. So there were 3 sophomores who were able to break into the lineup and play. And I was at running back at that time, and Lloyd already was at fullback. And so I got to get handoffs from my brother and that. And the big thing that helped too is I got to hold for his extra points and his field goals, which meant something to me that took place. And probably the biggest memory is when we went to Mosinee, that I can, for some reason, we went over there and I had some touchdowns and I held extra points there, and I think there was a play that broke down and I ended up doing something, or my brother, so Mosinee sticks in my head. But it was just a good opportunity, but it wasn't just me. There were a couple other sophomores who have broken into the lineup, and I think that was the nucleus of starting a very solid football program at Columbus that would follow.
Well, that Mosinee game, by the way, was your first, and you beat Mosinee 27-13. You mentioned Chuck, and he was the quarterback at Columbus for a few years and did quite well. Tell us about what type of player he was.
He was, and still is, a very studious person of the game. He understood the game in terms of where weaknesses were. Yeah, I know today in high school we teach quarterbacks how to read secondaries and that, but back when he played, that was not always the case. You ran pass plays and you were more interested in where your players were cutting. But he already understood where corners would be, where safeties would be, if they inverted or rotated. And this made, I think, him a very good quarterback in high school level. And it paid off for him because he went on and played college ball. He went to Wisconsin for a couple years, then he transferred out to U with me. We played on opposite sides of the ball, though he played defense. But I think it helped him because he understood down and situation very well at the corner position. And so those things take place, and he's been able to pass that on to his sons right now who are playing at St. Cloud. He has 2 of them up at St. Cloud playing. So it's interesting, but I think he was a real student of the game early in his career, and it showed.
One thing I notice about looking at Chuck's stats is the amount of rushing he did. He was not afraid to run the ball, or was that part of your designed offense back then?
I think certain things is, again, the pass wasn't as important as it is today in the game. And I think when he was a great runner. That's one of the things he had. He had great speed. And I think rather than putting the ball up in that and taking chance time, if the opportunity presented itself, he was more apt to run with the ball than to pass it if he had to. But I know that he has thrown some long touchdowns during his career, and that for records as well. So, I mean, he had the arm to do it, but I think that's that studious part of the game already. He knew it. It'd be better to take the yardage on the ground, just like you see in the Fars and that already, in that rather than an incomplete pass or a turnover. So I think that's part of his nature.
Now tell us about going into that basketball season, that sophomore year. What was that like?
Well, because I had the opportunity again to play as a freshman, I saw that same opportunity for me going into the sophomore year. I think we were looking at the situation, too, of having a relatively good team. And I think that I can't even remember the record, to be honest with you, overall, but I think that overall we played some pretty good basketball. And one of the things that I could feel is that I was developing some skills that were going to pay off for me down the road. It was a time when I believe that the chance for me to play inside started to occur. And when I got to be a junior and senior, where I really was able to accomplish some of my skills in basketball, it was my sophomore year that I went from the guard court to play inside. And for me personally, that's where I felt comfortable. I had the shots for the inside. I really was not a true jump shooter. If you wanted to say, was I a pure jump shooter from 18 and 19 foot range, I was not. I had the moves inside. I had the footwork. Many of my shots were basically a fadeaway or a quick drive to the basket. I had pretty good vertical jumps, so I made a lot of shots off second shots or rebounds. But it was that sophomore year that I remember I had the opportunity to start playing some inside game, and I think that would pay off in the years to come again.
Let me ask you about one of your teammates here who compiled a lot of stats, but he's a man that perhaps we don't talk about too much anymore, and that's Mike Dumas. And he played football with you, but I think Columbus fans from that era probably remember him for his basketball skills. What type of player was Mike?
He was just a hard worker. I think he was one of those persons that didn't lead by voice but led by example. He was an extremely hard worker, around the boards. He played hard between the free throw lines. You don't see a lot of kids who sprint between the free throw lines today or even then. And he made it a point to get from point A to point B at the other end of the floor as fast as he could. And I think that paid off for him in his career because I think he got down there for rebound positions. He was a great rebounder in Columbus background. When you talk about great kids who could get off the boards, get the second shots, in high school ball, that's what wins, the second shots. He was that worker, and even though he had a great baseline shot, Mike Dumas had a great baseline shot if people remember him, especially from the side where his left hand was, because he was a left-hand player. He was, you have to give credit again, because a lot of what he accomplished came from hard work.
I do see one ball game here, he had 26 rebounds. Were there, just looking statistically, it seems like there were more rebounds back in that era. Were there more missed shots or more second shots by ball players back then?
I think more taken shots. I think teams didn't wait as long to get a shot off. I think, again, that there's two philosophies. You get down and you pass the ball, and the first good shot you get, you take, because that cuts down on turnovers. But at the same time, that can be within 5 to 10 seconds sometimes, and that allows for more shots taken, more opportunities for rebounds. And so that takes place where today talented kids have a lot more confidence in controlling the ball. When you played with different kids 30 years ago, you might have felt at times because of foul trouble you didn't have the balance on the floor, and so rather than pass around to your teammates, which shouldn't be said maybe, shots were taken. Today you come off the bench with 6th and 7th players that are talented, you still work the ball, you bring it to the backside, things like this, and you're eating up time, and so the number of shots are cut down. So I think that that's a case why rebounding was up. Plus, I think Mike Dumas taught me, or I learned from him, that he understood when his teammates would shoot And I think a good rebounder needs to know that. If he knows that Chuck was going to shoot this shot, or if I was going to take this shot, Mike wasn't so interested and worried about taking the first shot. He understood that we were going to take our shots, or his teammates were, and he would have the instincts to get the first step to the boards for the rebound. And that's something that I learned going into my junior and senior year. It wasn't that I didn't want a teammate to shoot. If they were going to shoot, I wanted them to do it. You know what I mean? Don't fake me out, because if you want to take the shot, that's fine. I'll head to the boards. And that's a good instinct that Mike Dumas had too for rebounding, is he knew that his teammates were going to take their shots. And so he was going to go to the board, and if it went in, it was great. If not, he would be there for the rebound. That's one of the reasons he had that big game with 26 rebounds.
Now, you played basketball at Columbus for Bob Olson, and what was Bob like as a coach and a person to play for?
I think Bob Olson was a player who brought full court basketball to Columbus. In that, I remember that those were the years that in my freshman year and sophomore year, we played Xavier, who had pressed us. And I think when Coach Olson came, we started thinking about pressing and putting pressure on teams as well. And one of the reasons we did that is that we didn't have tremendous size. I mean, players are big today, but we weren't very big at all at that time. And so I think that we wanted to capitalize on mistakes in a game between the free throw lines. If we could get turnovers, steal the ball, get some layups, it would be to our advantage. And I think that's why scores were much higher, at least during my era at that time, is that we capitalized on a lot of mistakes that other teams made. So he brought a more wide open game to basketball, to Columbus. And I think that he was a little ahead of his time too, maybe 5-6 years, before other schools picked up on that.
Did you play for him as a freshman too?
I believe I did. I think that was his first year there. Okay. Because I cannot remember any other freshman coach or any other coach at that time. So I played, I think, all 4 years for Bob Olson.
Okay. Well, Bob, after your sophomore year, Coach Clay decides to leave, and you get a brand new football coach. Do you remember or have any memories about any early or first meetings with Walt Kroll?
Yeah, I think the first meeting was actually, okay, here we had a pretty good sophomore season, and our coach was leaving us, and we had 3 sophomores who played there, and we had a great group of seniors that graduated at that time. And so there was a little concern, I think, by myself and some of the younger kids, and that what were we going to be in for? And until we got to meet Coach Kroll, I think that we had this a little bit of doubt. I think that's a fair way of saying it, but an honest feeling. But Coach Kroll, I think, came in and made us feel very comfortable right away. I know that he had a lot of respect. At the time, we didn't know this, but he had a lot of respect for Tom Knauf and Lloyd Huffman and myself. And that's always mentioned that these 3 players, was the reason he came. But I think he saw more than that. I think he saw a good school. I think he saw a great parents, and I think he saw other great players too. But I know that over the years, it's always been mentioned us 3, and I think that that's not really fair. I think there were other kids with us that he saw too.
You're probably referring to that story he liked to tell that he took the game films home and he saw you and Tom and Lloyd and came back to the principal and said, I think I can help you, or something like that.
Right.
You probably heard that story, haven't you?
Right. That's a story, and I think that's a story that was told on the day that he was laid to rest. But like I said, he was a man that when you got to know him more and more, he saw more than that. I think he saw an opportunity for himself. He saw a situation that I think he felt he would be happy with. I think he saw a community that would work with him at that time. I know that over the years that he coached there, you have your ups and downs, but I think all of those things were reasons why he came. And he came for more than just football. He taught a lot of good character to kids and a lot of things about what's right and what's wrong. And I think a lot of good families are out there have a lot to owe to what Coach Kroll taught about family life too.
You mentioned some things that Coach Clay liked to do. What was it like now getting ready to play Coach Kroll's style of football?
He brought in at that time the I offense. It was just coming into existence at that time. The wing tee had kind of, or the straight tee and the wing tee, and there was another one in there, a different offense. But he brought in the I offense, and I think he saw that in the I offense that if you had a great fullback and if you had a good guard that could pull or a good guard that could trap, that offense would work. And so when everybody looks at my statistics, the truth of the matter, the I offense is based off a good lead fullback who can kick out an end or block a linebacker, and a guard who can run the trap plays inside or pull for you on the sweeps and the tosses. And so those two players, again, didn't get the credit they needed, because in the I offense, those players are key players. And so he brought that to Columbus. I know that later he changed his offense, but for us, that was the best offense. It created some balance. I know that Dave Weber was the quarterback at that time. We had a couple other kids, Buster Sexton, David Langreek. We were not very big in the line. I remember that some of our tackles were only about 175, 180 pounds, that our backfield and Tom Knauf would have been the biggest kids on the team. So, but it was a finesse game. He very seldom put people straight on. We often had angle blocks. We had calls ready at that time. We were making calls on the line of scrimmage, and we were making calls by the backs. So we were making calls on people and angles to block because we lacked size. And that made a big difference in some of those big first games in my junior and senior year, is that we were able to block bigger teams because of the design of his offense and his blocking scheme, along with the fact that we had some quickness. We beat size with quickness.
You've just said something really heretical. I don't think anybody knows that Walt Kroll played an eye. This first time I've heard about that. That was quite a surprise to hear.
Yeah, he came with the eye offense because Lloyd was in front of me, and we'd run out of the power eye where either I would jump over to the one side or the other, and Lloyd would get the ball, and I would kick out the end, or he would jump over to the side and he'd kick out the end. Or we'd lead block in the hole. We'd break out of the eye into split back sometimes. But we ran quite a bit of eye. We ran the toss out of the eye. We ran a lot of counter plays. We'd fake the Lloyd on one side, and then I would go on the other side. So we had that where linebackers couldn't just follow the fullback, and trap blocks. We ran a lot of traps. We ran a lot of what was called a fake lead like this, sweep, and then we'd cut back over the tackle. And the teams that started swinging out to take away the speed, because like I said, Tom Knauf ran on our relay teams. He was extremely fast and about 215 pounds. I mean, he could run and very strong. And so when he pulled, teams wanted to get out in front, and we'd just cut back on him. So he spread teams out. We ran a lot of short. You talk about the West Coast offense. I think that was in existence too, because Dave Weber didn't have the extremely strong arm that some of the quarterbacks ahead of him had, but he had an accurate arm. And so we ran a lot of 5-yard passing routes to quick slants and things like this, which, is kind of what's effective today in football. So again, a coach brought in something that he saw would fit the style of play, and that's often what I said we need coaches to do. Are you a coach's coach, or are you a player's coach? Do you coach, take kids and force them into an offense, or do you take kids, look at what you have, and then find an offense to fit what he had? Coach Kroll found an offense that fit the kids he had, and when we left, and that type of back at 200 pounds that I was, and Lloyd left, we ended up he went to a different offense that fit the needs of his kids. So he adjusted to the times very well, Coach Kroll did.
Well, Bob, you've alluded on several occasions here to Lloyd Hoffman and Tom Knauf. So let's talk about those guys and what they meant to you and your Columbus football teams.
Well, I think they were, again, the hidden heroes. I think that Tom Knauf went out and proved after he was out of high school the knowledge he had in the game himself as a coach at Stratford and places. Obviously, his sons right now are talented athletes right now. You couldn't have played football without players like that. And for me to have the success I had, it was those guys. I mean, those guys could block. I mean, it's a game that's, the skills of blocking and the technique was there, and these guys were just quality players. Tom Knauf was a real hitter. And people who didn't know it, Tom suffered from many concussions, and probably put an end to his career because he was out at the University of South Dakota with me, and I know that he transferred back because of concussions and that. So, I mean, he put it all out there every game, and what more can you say about a player or a teammate that did that? And Lloyd did the same thing. He could have been a very jealous player at times, I suppose, because he was a talented, strong runner. He was as good a fullback as you could have had in today's football or any time. But he sacrificed his body for some good blocks for me. So those are kids that you can't go by the wayside, just talented athletes.
I know one thing that Tom Knopf would like me to bring up is his pass catching abilities, because it seems, especially your senior year, he got a couple of passes from Coach Kroll. And I remember Coach Kroll telling me how that worked, but do you recall that? A tackle eligible play or something that made Tom a receiver?
Right. A couple of times I think we just ran it at that time, what was the on-balance line, and the shifts and motion was starting to come into football, and of course that was just a step coming to finding out if you had a zone defense or a man-to-man who would follow you. And by just shifting a player and taking it, what would be a 5-yard flanker was just 5 yards off the tackle, would step back, making Tom eligible sometimes, because he did play tackle once in a while. Or once in a while, we would run both tackles on the same side with a tight end to Tom's side, and then the tight end would just step back, and Tom would become eligible as a guard. And we were running powerful sweeps that way, and it was fun. I think Coach Kroll, in all of things, kept the game fun, kept the perspective fun, as much as he wanted to teach us to win. But it wasn't to win ball games. I think it was to win some things that we would need to be successful in life too. But he kept it fun, and I think that's a good lesson for coaches today. You still gotta keep things in perspective, and you gotta still have some fun.
Anything about that junior football season that you recall, Bob?
I think it sent a message to maybe Central Wisconsin, and it sent a message to the Catholic Conference that we were in at that time, that we were going to become a successful program, that we had a successful coach. I think it was a major stepping stone for all of the kids in that we learned to trust in Coach Kroll because he was a new coach. And it also got us interested in being prepared for the senior year, and for all of us, especially when you have Tom and Lloyd and myself, who were fortunate enough to start as sophomores, we knew the importance of that. I can tell you some very important things that Coach Kroll did that I remember the first practice is our senior year, and I'm sure it was our junior year too, is that we would make a line and we would let all the freshmen run through and we'd congratulate them. And then at the last game of the year, all the rest of the players would make a line and the seniors would run through it. And so he taught some very good things about team play and bringing kids into program and not harassing kids but respecting your teammates. So those are some points that you can't just let go of. Those are very positive points that he taught.
Real minor point here, but you opened that season against Mosinee, and I was told that Coach Clay saw that game. I don't know if you knew that or not, but Coach Clay said he was there. He saw the game. He talked with Coach Kroll afterwards. Anything you recall about that, about Coach Clay being there to watch his former team play that first game?
I think I do remember him after the game. I do not remember him being there during the game, but I think after the game he did come up and talk to the three of us. I remember that we were standing there with Coach Kroll and that he came up for a few minutes and congratulated us and things like that. So, I mean, it was a good start, I don't even remember that record that year, but I think that in our junior year, that first game was a lot of building trust. It was a new offense and everything, but I do remember Coach Clay being there for that game, after the game, not before the game.
You were alluded, Bob, to the CWCC, and that must have been a real difficult schedule you guys had back then. Tell us what that was like playing football in the CWCC.
Yeah, that was an extremely tough conference. People compared that. I know the Valley is considered to be an extremely powerful conference in the state right now, and back in those days, the Catholic Conference that we played in there with Aquinas, Eau Claire, Assumption, Pacelli, Wassa, Newman, ourselves, and Chippewa Falls McDonald was a powerhouse conference. I mean, Aquinas was pushing 1,000 kids. We were up there in numbers. I mean, it was much different than it is today. I mean, and it wasn't uncommon, as you will see in the teams we picked to play and the many teams that Columbus played after that, that we took on any size school anytime, because it was a quality conference, it had quality athletes. If you were to go look at some of the athletes like Aquinas, there was a Stickler and a Murphy boy that played on their football team that went on to be great hurdlers at Tennessee. I mean, there were quality athletes just across the board. The Crumrights at Assumption, the Fishers that played in different sports at Eau Claire. So, I mean, it wasn't just a conference. It had quality athletes, skilled athletes. And I think that's important, too. They were skilled athletes. So it was a great conference to play in. We had Prairie du Chien camping, if you really remember that. I mean, I think most of their players at first or at some time were totally from out of state. I mean, they brought in kids from all over, and that just added. And I remember my junior, senior year, there were some kids on there, the Shinners and that I think went on and played professional football. So it was a high-level conference with highly competitive kids and a set of precedents at that time. I mean, we weren't afraid, and teams respected us throughout the state.
And your non-conference schedule is pretty rough also. Appleton Xavier and Oshkosh Lords and some others you played, Mosinee. You didn't really get too many breaks during the season, did you?
No, and then that was, again, Coach Kroll's real philosophy in sports. If you want to be the best, you have to play the best. And if you want to reach a higher caliber, you go out and do it. And then the question was, will your kids rise to the occasion? And at times people were wondering why we were doing that, but realistically over the years it proved to be quite successful for the program, for the school, and I think for the kids. And it built character. It built where every day we practiced hard because the next game was just as hard or harder than the one before. So we didn't look at things as being easy or took things easy.
How about your junior season in basketball? You were 10-12, which perhaps is not the record you wanted, but still some real standout ball games in that season.
Again, that goes to show that I think that the conference was very tough, and where we were starting to become a football power, there were some schools already who were very strong in basketball. And it proved to be very difficult because where Columbus kids were maybe quick and more of a track background, the schools, some of the other schools were really talented, taller kids in basketball. I know that Pacelli was an extremely tough team to play year in and year out because they had such big players. Eau Claire, Regis had some very tall players all the time, and that made it very difficult. It made it very difficult to play inside basketball or to play that second shot theory. So it was difficult, but 10-12 didn't make it impossible for us to have belief in the next year and things like that. And we were still developing as a basketball program. I think Coach Olson at that time was still working on developing some things, which later you'll see Columbus becomes a basketball power, becomes, even in the recent years here. So, again, Coach Olson had patience with all of us and didn't let us just die. He kept working with us all the time.
You mentioned that your junior year was the year you more or less moved full-time to be an inside-type basketball player. What was that move like?
Well, it allowed me to use two factors. One, again, size. Even though I wasn't tall, I carried enough weight that I could compete with kids that were a little taller in size. It allowed me to use some of the quickness that I had, and that's kind of a God-gifted talent, that I had good quickness inside so I could make the first good step. I had a good vertical jump, but I had a shot that was pretty effective from maybe 10, 12 feet, a fadeaway shot that allowed me to draw players just enough distance from the basket that allowed me to get around them then and play some inside game. If I had to strictly shoot over a tall player all the time, I wouldn't have been as successful. So again, that shot, and I think it took Coach Olson, give him a lot of credit, because it probably wasn't the most fundamental shot that was being played in those days, but he knew it was effective for me and I could shoot a pretty good percent on it. And I think overall that allowed not only myself to achieve some goals, but I think it also allowed some of the other players some rebound because I pulled some players away from the basket. So again, it took some good coaching, some good understanding by my coaches to allow some of that to happen. Some coaches would not allow that.
I should ask you about playing at Columbus High School, playing basketball in that gym. What kind of experience was that in terms of the atmosphere, the crowd, and the physical layout of the gymnasium?
Yeah, it was a quality gym back when I was playing. I mean, it was not that old of a gym. We were talking maybe 14, 15 years that Columbus was that gym. It was a big gym for that size. We had great crowds. I can remember that. I mean, there were people on both sides. There were great followings by the conference schools. I remember that when we went somewhere, we had a great following. When Eau Claire, Regis, and those teams came, they brought great crowds. So the competition and the atmosphere was always great. And I think that allowed us, at the same time forced us, to play at our peak all the time because we had that type of atmosphere in our gyms. So it went hand in hand with visiting teams just as much as our home team spectators.
Were there some of those CWCC teams that were more rivals than others?
Oh yeah, I think that some of the closer ones, Assumption would have had to been one for sure in football. Pacelli was always one that was like to beat Pacelli in basketball because he just had tremendous height, some tremendous talent in basketball. WOSQ and Newman a little bit, but I think the real rivals were the two closest, Stephen Point and Assumption, that people wanted to beat or you felt you had to beat. Aquinas was a challenge all the time because they had the numbers and they always brought some quality players. I remember when Campion came, they played very physical basketball, almost like football, very strong inside basketball, very hard to play against. So, but the rivalry was Assumption and Pacelli, I'm sure.
Bob, before we get on to your senior year, and I want to mention this before I forget it, but I do want you to talk about your track accomplishments, because I don't have a lot of track stuff in front of me, so I can't go through all your track meets and year by year, but tell us about some of the things you did in track that made you a special athlete.
Well, I think that actually goes, again, to good coaching, that Coach Kroll had the philosophy that if you could run, if you had good legs, you could be a good athlete. And I think that was my philosophy as well, that if your legs go, you're pretty much done. And that showed up in my knee when I injured it. So he emphasized conditioning, he emphasized muscle tone if nothing else. And he believed in quickness. He felt that all the time quickness was the key to good athletics. And it's proven today, even with the size of professional athletes, they still like the quickness, And so he kind of put that into our track practices. He emphasized that. And I think that not only football, but basketball and everything paid off eventually, that even though we lacked size in basketball my senior year, it was the track that we instilled in each other that made us quick enough on the basketball floor. So track was a very big part of my success. It taught me how to run. It taught me how to use my energy efficiently, that I wasn't wasting energy, and a little bit is God-gifted talent. Not everybody comes out with the speed or the quickness you have. You can develop some of that, but some of it is just God-gifted. And so you have to thank God for that. But yeah, it was track, and I think that Coach Kroll was an extremely talented track coach in that he understood how to put his track teams together to create points, that would allow them to win meets and that. He knew how to adjust. So it wasn't just a common factor that you would spend the whole year just running the 100 or 200 or hurdles or long jump. He looked at where the points would be, who you were going up against, and if he didn't feel some kids could win or place in the event but felt they had a better chance in a different place, he expected that of kids, to give and take. So many of the track kids really had the ability to probably participate in 4 or 5 events, and they just didn't participate in one. Like I said, even Tom Knauf fit into some of the relay situations we had because he had great quickness, even though he's a tremendous shot putter at that time. He was just a very strong person. And so we all adjusted, and it paid off in our senior year for a state championship in the Catholic division there. So
I was going to ask you about that WISA state championship in track. What was that like to win that state title?
Well, it was a great feeling, because I think for all the kids who had gone through, Tom and Lloyd and myself and the other kids on the track team that were in football and basketball, and we had gotten to the state tournament in basketball, but we finished 4th there that time. It was just a great accomplishment to be that last sport in your last year in high school to have that championship, and it's something that sticks with you. I know that I had a great year, and I had some great accomplishments at state that year, but it's not to be to overshine some of the kids that also performed well that day. I mean, Danny Maurer was right there behind me in the 100-yard, finishing second, and you just don't realize how those second places and third places really add up for points when you're that close to winning or losing a championship. And so those kids often go by the wayside, but second is just as important as first on that day. It really is, because their points are important. So
Your senior year for football, you opened the season with a game that Coach Crowell liked to talk about a lot, St. Paul Cretin, and what a great day you had individually that day, 292 yards and 5 touchdowns, and a punt return, I think, for a touchdown as well. What are your thoughts about that game? It seems to be like one of the legendary games in Columbus history.
Not only was it legendary, I think it was scary at first. We're taking on St. Paul Cretin at that time, which was an extremely talented football team in Minnesota history. In fact, I want to point out that some of the kids that I played against, I went on to be very good friends with because they played at the University of South Dakota with me. But Coach Crowell, he had us they went to eat at a restaurant, I can't think of the name right now, and as the St. Paul Cretin kids got off, he introduced us to the coach and everything else, and these kids were big, you know what I mean? And so we're sitting there, talking to these guys, and they're coming off with talented players, and so it's kind of scary. I remember going back and thinking about that. Maybe if I didn't see him, it would have been better. But he had the right philosophy again. Here is his theory of quickness. He felt that on a warm day in the afternoon that we played, that if we played our game with our speed, we could beat them. And I remember that most of our first plays in the first quarter were just sweeps. We would go from one side to the other, and we wore down their line very early in the game. And I think that just allowed us to get the first step from that point on in terms of blocks and angle blocks and trap blocks. And things went our way, and it paid well. It certainly made the difference for me. From that point on, the papers, the radio, and things like that sure picked up on that game for me. But again, we had some great play by some great players. If you looked at the films, and I remember them very clearly, I'm taking a sweep, and right out in front of me, right off my left hand, is Tom Knauf. He's out there, and he's throwing a block for you. You go 70 yards because there he is throwing that block, and you don't see that or it doesn't get in the paper. But on the film, I remember that we had some great blocks from our split ends in that game too, that got downfield on safeties, and so the big runs, the big yardage that game came from some key blocks, some very key blocks.
Well, you had quite a senior year, Bob, rushing for 20 touchdowns, over 1,600 yards. You mentioned that certainly some of the guys you played with were largely responsible for your success that year, but do you have any overall thoughts about that season, how things went for you in 1965?
Yeah, it was the year that I wanted it to be. I think everybody dreams of having that great year, that senior year, and that turned out for me. I think Coach Crowell tried to make that happen and still tried to balance out, because I didn't carry the ball all that much that year. I remember I've only carried about 16 times a game, which isn't a lot of times for an I back, because we're still running the I, because usually the I emphasized the I back. But I remember that Lloyd got his share, some other kids got in and played when we got ahead in ball games, so he tried to balance that out. But I think Coach put me in a position of kickoff returns, punt returns. Those are the things that really I think I could stand out. Even when I went to college, kickoff returns was, I think I still averaged about 35 yards a kickoff return, which is a tremendous amount of yards in that. And those are the things I stood out more for, I think, was the open field running, the punt returns, and that kind of stuff. And he put me in a position to show those skills, even though I could run well from the line. Plus, he did some things my senior year in terms of getting me some swing passes, and that helped me in college also show that I could catch the ball as well, that, backs should catch the ball. So he prepared players, and I think he put players in position so that they could go on if they wanted to. He was concerned about that kind of thing with his players, and so I have to thank him for that.
Well, there's been a lot of positive things to talk about in your career, Bob, but let's bring up one negative, and that's the Assumption game your senior year. You got beat 19-7, and that caused you to miss out on a perfect season. Otherwise, you finished 8-1. And I see in the stats here you were held to 46 rushing yards and no touchdowns in that game. Can you recall that contest and what stopped you guys that day?
The one thing that we could not control was nature. It was an absolutely wet, rainy night, muddy field, and Assumption came with an extremely talented kids in the Crum Rise, a very big line. They were bigger than us, and when it came to where we couldn't run our sweeps, we couldn't run the trap blocks we had to, and we had to play straight on football. It wasn't there. We couldn't physically match up with them, and when it came to trying to throw the ball, it was just a pouring rainy night, and it really did hurt us. It's not an excuse, but that's the nature of the game, and that would have hurt us in other games if we would have had bad weather. But fortunately, the other games we did not have that bad weather. But that would have been the one thing. But Assumption was a very good team. I think they won the conference that year and went on. So they were a very talented team, and you have to give credit to their coaches at that time as well. But it took away the thing that we totally relied on, and that was our quickness and our speed, and we couldn't do it on that field. It was just wet. I remember even trying to run some sweeps, and I could have been sliding into second base because you just couldn't turn the corner. So I mean, and that's the way it goes. And you look back, and it isn't that we didn't play hard. Every kid played very hard in that game, but it wasn't supposed to be, and it makes you a better person, I think.
Today we have high school football playoffs, and everybody makes the playoffs. Half the schools in the state make the playoffs, so you go 500 in your conference. You did not have that back in your era. What was the feeling like when a football season came to an end? You're 8-1 and the season's over. There's nothing else to go on for. And maybe high school football playoffs weren't talked about that back then. But what was your reaction or the thoughts of your teammates when that season came to an end and now we're 8-1 and it's all over?
I think that in basketball, you always knew, you go to basketball, you go to track, you always knew that there was going to be a conference meet, there was going to be a regional, there was going to be a basketball opportunity. You could have been 0-20 in basketball, and you knew there was going to be one more game. But in football, it was like the door closed. It was kind of an empty feeling. And so for the state to go to the playoffs and that, I think really created some positive incentives, because one thing in football I know is that when teams lost their first 2 or 3 games in football, they pretty much threw in the towel. It was like, that's it for the season. But with the playoffs, there was a chance of, if you could win 4 games, if you could win 5 games, it allowed teams to keep playing hard. It allowed players to have a reason to play hard. In football, when we had it, it really was a negative, because boom, if you lost those couple of games, you had that. So from that point of view, the playoffs, I think, is important. For me, I remember it was like, it's over. There's no more. It was really a closed-door situation. There was no prepping. I knew I'd go on to play college ball. I had the opportunity. But for other kids, I'm sure it was like all you worked for was, it's done. And I mean, so there wasn't a good closure, maybe you might say, to high school football at that time.
And how about your senior year in basketball, when things finally began to turn around a bit for Columbus High School, and you guys had quite a year your senior season?
Right. The biggest situation there I remember is that Coach Kroll going in, I mean, we had a great year, and we played some tough basketball, and I think we even had a winning record during the year. But when we went into playoffs, we had to always face our rivals. It would be Pacelli, it would be Newman, and it would be Assumption, pretty much in our regional right there, that we would have to play. And how were we going to beat these teams when it came to that time of the year? Well, that became very difficult. First of all, I think we beat Assumption twice during the year, and it's like, to beat a team the third time made it hard. So, but we were fortunate to play a very unique ball game against Assumption in the playoffs, in that we actually stalled a little bit. We almost stalled the entire game. I think the game was very low scoring, if I'm not mistaken, in the first game. And so we played a very stall, kind of delayed type game, kept the game close, and we beat them. And then I think we faced Pacelli in the championship game, and that was all that size that they had at that time, and it was like we slowed it down again, and we pretty much got to where we played our game, and we took away their height, and that was good coaching, because if we would have tried to compete against their height, we wouldn't have been able to beat them. So, and I think we split with them our senior year during the year, and but it was again a good situation of, let's get down to the last minute, the last 2 minutes, and see what we can do, rather than try to compete with that height the whole game. So good coaching, good philosophy, and we were able to get to state. And I think we played Oshkosh Lourdes in the first game, and that was a close one also. So, but it was a rewarding experience, like I said, for my teammates and myself to be able to have the good football year, to get to state in basketball, and then win the track our senior year. I mean, that was a good accomplishment for my teammates, for the class, our senior class, and for Columbus, I think. And even the city of Marshfield at that time, because I think the public school was struggling a little bit at that time. So it was good for Marshfield, I think.
What do you recall about that Lord's contest? It seems like you won by 1 on a free throw by Bob Koch with 0 time on the clock. Tell us about that situation.
Well, that was unique because it actually was a football setup, because I remember that we were getting the ball out of bounds on the side, and we set up a play that would actually be a long pass from Dave Weber, who actually would throw it to the backside away from the basket, and then I took a long shot, or not a long shot, but a percentage shot that I would make, and I was fouled in the act of shooting. And so it had to start with a good pass, and Dave Weber threw a very good pass to me on that play, and I remember that we called a timeout to set it up, so it started with the good pass, and fortunately I got the first free throw to go down, because I was quite nervous in the second one. You know, of course, with the first one going down nowadays, I'm not even sure they would even shoot the second one, but so the second one didn't mean as much, but it went down. It didn't go right through. I remember bouncing around there on the rim, but it went through, so that was good. But that was another game. I think it was in the 50s, like 50-some, 54, yep. And it was one of our lower scoring games that senior year. But I don't think I had the most points in that game. I mean, I had points, but it wasn't my average in that. I know that some other kids contributed in the game. Yeah, and that wasn't quite my average. So other kids had to perform and did an excellent job in that game. And we were again playing a pretty good-sized Lourdes team. So we went up against big teams, and by the time we got to state, I guess we were getting used to it, because basically I might have been the tallest player. I'm trying to think now if we even had somebody taller. John Connerty was a little taller than I that played. That would have been Jack's son. And but we weren't very big, so we had to use quickness. So
what was it like for you and your teammates to go down there and play at the Milwaukee Arena?
That was unique. But it all started, if you want to be honest with you, it started a few years before that, because Coach Olson knew for kids to have dreams come true, he had to get them in an atmosphere. And so early, already our sophomore year in that, Coach Olson we had car washes and we did different things, and we went down to watch the tournament there, to create an atmosphere that Columbus has not seen, because we weren't a basketball team at all at that time, not a power at all in basketball. And so he tried to create an atmosphere, a feeling amongst the players, so that you'd want to go there. And I think that had a lot to do with that drive, that the senior year, we beat Assumption, we beat Pacelli during the year. So when we got to regionals, it wasn't like a mental block in front of you saying we couldn't beat these teams. And that was very important. So he started that atmosphere before, but it was a great atmosphere. Of course, a huge arena. And so even though you brought a lot of people and everything, it didn't seem very packed, but it was an experience that you cannot forget again. Went up against some great players. I remember that the Fisher was there from Eau Claire, because Eau Claire Regis made it there. Played against Edgewood. There was a Sweeney's. There was great brothers and relatives of Sweeney's, but that I played against Edgewood in football my senior year, and they made it there in basketball, and we played against them. So it was a great experience. We went up against some great players. I think Milwaukee Messmer was there, and I'm going to say John Johnson was there, a Johnson boy that went on to play in professional basketball. And so, I mean, the talent level was great. Went up against great players. Got to meet great people that you know the rest of your life. You can't replace that.
A couple of things about your senior year I do want to ask. First of all, against, I think it's Pacelli, 33 rebounds the first time you played Pacelli. How'd you do that?
That was a game where I knew I wasn't going to get many shots. They were very big. And so what happened there is many of my points, if I'm not mistaken, came off second shots. They really did. And because other shots were taking place, I know I worked the baseline very well in that game. I remember very well that Coach Olson talked about, if I want to get rebounds, I'm not going to get rebounds coming from the free throw down the lane. They're going to screen me out. But one place that if I worked the baseline and came out and boxed them out, that I would get some inside position. And again, it was good coaching that led to that. So yeah, 33 rebounds is an accomplishment, but it was something that Coach Olson, I should say, Coach Olson knew that if I was going to rebound, it wasn't going to be from the ordinary positions on the floor. It was going to be coming off the baseline, working underneath, and that in getting the timing. So again, great coaching. You can't replace it.
And in the playoff game with Assumption, it looks like you had 26 free throw attempts in that ball game.
Right. Right. I think their philosophy was that if I'm going to beat them, it would have to be at the free throw line. And I don't even know what I made. If I made
18.
that 18, okay. So and their philosophy was that they would foul me, and put me at the free throw line, which isn't a bad philosophy, rather than giving me some of those inside shots or quickness that I had over them. That's one thing I could do against Assumption, is I could score inside on them. They weren't that big of a team either, but they had great guards in the Crumrys, and then Bob Crumry was a physical player inside. But that wouldn't have been his senior year, because he would have graduated, I think. Was Bob before or after Steve? I don't remember that closely, but it was their philosophy to put me at the free throw line. But Coach Olson prepared most of us for free throw shooting. We shoot a lot more free throws in practice than teams do, I'm sure, today. Mm-hmm. Today they teach a lot of team skills in practice, and they expect you to shoot your free throws and shooting skills, on your own time. But we spent a lot of free throw shooting. I think a lot of our games, if you look close, might have been won at the free throw line that senior year.
Bob, any other thoughts you have about your high school career at Columbus?
It's just that it's a great experience. Columbus was a great school for me, and the opportunity to play at Columbus, you cannot replace, because it taught you a lot about life. And I had coaches that extended beyond the winning. I know that there's a lot of players and a lot of people that that go out, and winning's so important, but they prepared me well for my future, and they prepared me well for working with kids. And I've spent a lifetime then working with kids. And it was the two coaches basically in high school, I think, that did that, that have to have the credit. But I had great teachers. I think teachers who understood me at the time, because could have applied myself a little bit better in the classroom, but my heart was in sports and that. And it wasn't until I was in college and actually hurt my knee that I understood more that, how important my education would be. And so it wasn't until I actually got into college that my college education and my grades started to really improve to a point where they probably should have been in high school. But I had, again, understanding teachers that maybe realized that different people grow up at different times, and they never threw in, the towel on me or put me in a position where I would regret anything. So fortunate people to be around. Maybe it's the private school atmosphere. I can't say it would have been in a public school because I wasn't there, but for me it was a great situation with understanding people.
Aside from the coaches you've talked about, were there any teachers at Columbus High School that meant a lot to you?
Father Kelly probably was Coach Kroll's best friend, who was a great supporter for me. I mean, I know Father Kelly, and I even had seen him up to when Coach Kroll passed away. He was down at Westfield in the area where I coached for quite a few years. So Father Kelly was a real influence to me. But I think the biggest thing that took place when I was in high school is that the nuns at that time were for the first time allowed to come to games. And they actually started getting involved, coming to games, and they'd walk in for the varsity games, and they would cheer for you. And the conversation in the classroom for at least a couple minutes or before class started, the nuns would be supportive of athletics and that. Where, of course, today in the public schools, teachers go to games and everything else. That was not the case. They pretty much stayed in the convent and that. So I think they started to encourage athletics. They saw some of the value. They saw how the school spirit was built around that. And so I think that some of the comments made by the sisters and the nuns at that time were a great influence too.
Do you recall, Gordy Clay told me this story, driving back to Columbus High School late at night after a road game, and the nuns would flick the lights on and off in the convents?
Right. You would go by with our buses, and if you honked the buses, they would be at the windows and that. And that was early and before, that was our junior and senior year that the nuns could come. In our freshman and sophomore year, they couldn't. And that is true, that if you went by, they would have their lights and they'd be waiting by the windows. And if you didn't go by, it was just like you'd hear that the next day, so you had to go by. But that was the only way they could support the program until they could actually attend games and that. And so I think that's a real plus, that even in the smallest way, you knew you had people behind you.
Well, Bob, what about after Columbus? You went on to the University of South Dakota, and tell us about that decision to play football out there.
Yeah, because I had different choices. I think the thing that convinced me to go there was the opportunity to play sooner, because the hardest thing for me would have been is to have to sit the bench, which ended up happening anyway because of the injury. But my difficulty would have been, what would I have done for a year or two if I went to a big school and I didn't get the opportunity to play? Would I lose my interest? Would I be real upset? I played all the time and so much in high school that I really didn't know what JV ball was or something like that. And so I decided to pick a school that I thought that I could get on the field right away. You might think this was crazy, but Coach Kroll and Coach Salem were good friends. Coach Salem and Coach Kroll knew each other from up in Minnesota. And when Coach Salem took his job out at South Dakota, he was trying to build a program. And he did a real good job of coming and talking to my parents and myself about the opportunity there. It was not the best of facilities, but he was very honest and true. And he committed himself to saying that I would get an education, that I would get the things I would need to go on in life. And so the fact that he was interested in Tom Knauf and Lloyd Huffman at the time too, Lloyd didn't go there, but Tom did, I thought was really nice that opportunity would occur. Coach Warner had something to do with it, and people never realized that Coach Warner was a coach of St. Paul Creighton. The team we played the first game of the year, Tim Wujak played on that team. Coach Warner was going to leave St. Paul Creighton to go to South Dakota to be an assistant, and he was taking some of his players, and I knew that they were talented players, and I started thinking about, if they go and if we go, it would. Sure, it wasn't Division I, but it was Division II. There were many players out of that conference who were playing in the pros already, so I felt I would have that opportunity if it did exist. But there was the combination of Coach Warner, Coach Salem, Coach Kroll, kids that I knew that were going there. I felt confident going there because the Crumrights ended up going to North Dakota, so I knew it was a quality conference. And so all those things played a part because some people thought I should have played and I didn't go at the level I should have. But I think there were a lot of other things that people didn't know that were important, and it did pay off. My brother got to play there again, so something I thought I lost in high school, we actually got back to play again. Some great players came from the East. Jim Foster, Kojak, Kohler, John Kohler, Steve Pilot, who later played in Central Wisconsin Valley, went out there to play. So we had a lot of players from the Valley and Central Wisconsin that ended up out there, and I felt really good about the fact that I was helping to build that school and that tradition. And even with the injury, we went on to have some quality football years. We were a ranked team and had the fortune again of making all conference at the college level.
We don't know too much, Bob, about your accomplishments out there. Can you kind of summarize how things went for you out there?
Well, it started out with, at that time, freshmen could not play. Even Division I could not play on varsity teams. So you were playing a freshman schedule. And I played 4 freshman games. That's all they really rounded up. And in those 4 games, I think I scored 17 touchdowns in the 4 freshman games. And combined yardage of kickoffs and everything, my freshman year, I was almost up to 1,000 yards in rushing and punt returns and pass returns and everything. So the year, it was going great, and I'm sure that the state of South Dakota and the university was really looking forward to it. And spring ball came that freshman year, and the lights went out, to tell you the truth. I was having a great spring game, and then just unintentional, stand-up tackle, and I didn't go down. Maybe it was my own fault. I maybe should have fell, and I just stood up, and it was a hit on my right knee that just, and the knee was locked, and it just tore up the ACL and the medial lateral ligament in the inside, and it was a pretty good tear. It was gone. And so it took 18 months. I mean, it didn't come back very quickly, so I even had to go through that summer, and then it didn't come back the next year, and I think Coach Salem really wanted me to play, but he knew that the risk was too great, and so I rehabilitated it some more and everything else. And then the following spring, things went well again, and so it was almost 18 months later before, plus my whole freshman year, so it turned out to be another 2.5 years. So, it was almost as if I would have went to big school and even had to work my way up to that. But it taught me some things about school. It taught me I started to realize, that it only takes a split second, and it's something that I pass on to kids all the time. It's great to have these dreams, but, don't be a trunk of a tree. Make sure you have many branches and other things, because it can go very quickly. But with the knee, I never really had complete ability in that knee after that. I taped it for every practice, every game. I mean, my skin was raw. And Coach Salem, again, a great coach, put me in a position that allowed me to do the things I could do well without having to carry the ball that many times. And so most coaches would not have put me in a kickoff return position or punt return position with a knee like I had, but I never injured the knee in those positions, and maybe it was the ability to run with the ball there or whatever, but I was able to break loose for 3 or 4 kickoff returns and some punt returns as well, and that was what I could do in high school as well. And then they ran me in specific situations. I might only run the ball from the line of scrimmage anywhere around 7 to 10 times a game, and with my junior year when I was healthy, that I only accounted for like 500 and some yards from the line of scrimmage, but I had 16 touchdowns and several kickoff returns, and we were able to, other than North Dakota State, where the Crumb Rise went, they beat us. We finished second in the conference, and we were ranked. So good coaching allowed me to get through with less than a good leg. But then the following year, the injury came back. I think I only played like 7 games that year, and I had to make a decision, how bad was I going to damage the knee? And so I knew I wanted to coach and stuff, and so I transferred the scholarship to actually play in baseball my senior year. So I played baseball my senior year, and I did not, in my 5th year of college, play football. It was going to be a risk. My knee couldn't take the blows like it could before. So it was a difficult decision, but 2 good coaches helped me. The baseball coach wanted me, number one, to play baseball from my Legion days. He knew I could play, and Coach Salem understood it, which took a lot from a coaching point of view, because he could have been selfish too. So again, some understanding coaches. The program had been built. Several good recruits had come in, including Steve Pilot from, I think he played Pacelli at that time, and then he was out of Rapids though, but he played at Pacelli. So good athletes were coming. The program was going. Might have served my purpose, you might say, in a way. But I mean, it helped me with my coaching. I understand injuries. I don't think a kid should be at risk at injuries. I think parents have to be involved when it comes to injuries on what they want their kids to do. And winning is important, but it really isn't everything. So you have to look at everything in perspective.
Tell us about your coaching career.
Coaching, it had its situations. Believe it or not, I never was a head football coach. I don't know if that was to be or not to be. I helped with assistant programs, and in Schleswig, Iowa, we had some very effective programs. The thing that was unique about it is that I actually ended up coaching defense rather than offense. And maybe it's because when you're in a good offensive situation, you understand offense. So as a defensive coach, you know what you need to stop. And so I knew some of the things you had to stop when you were a defensive coach, and force teams to do things that are second and third on their list of things to do, and that paid off. So in Schleswig, they had playoffs already in Iowa those first 6 years, and we were in those. I did not coach as much football in Montello. In Schleswig, I was actually head basketball coach because, I had played some basketball, and that went with me on my resume. And I took a team there from totally last place, and in 3 years we won the conference championship, had great players. I came to Wisconsin one summer on vacation, 6 years, and my brother told me about a job that had opened up in Montello 1 week before school was starting. I went and applied for it. I got the job, went back to Schleswig, had to break my contract there, which they didn't like. I think everybody would understand it now, but they didn't like it then. Had to pack up all my things, move here, and spent 24 years basically in Montello, where I took a basketball program again from last place to a conference championship, only to be beat by Oakfield that time, and they finished second in the state in the playoffs. Had good success with girls sports. I took on girls softball for 7 years, won 5 conference championships, 6 regional championships, went to state twice and finished second in softball. So, and that goes back to some of the baseball. I think, there isn't a great difference when it comes to the skills of softball and baseball and fielding and throwing. The rules in softball really made it helpful because you could really sub. You had the re-entry rule, which really could allow you to play players in positions that can really hurt other teams. And so that helped. I know that it became quite a competition because my brother was at Marshall at the time, and we always ended up playing each other. One of us or two, and Mom and Dad had to sit in the bleachers right behind the dugout, and they didn't know who to root for, but they knew that one of us were going to go to state, so it was going to be fine. But a couple years I beat Marshall, and then a couple years he beat us, and of course Chuck went on to have great years at Marshall as a softball coach as well. So I got all the way through my life, one way or another, got to work with or compete against my brother. So that's an unusual situation too, and something I can always remember. That not everybody gets to do that as brothers. So, and then, well, that was pretty much the most areas that I did. And then I still like coaching. I'm a fundamentalist, though. I really believe the skills, the shooting skills, the shooting techniques are very important. I emphasize footwork. Most of the kids that I have, girls or boys, always had good rebounders. I knew the value of the second shot. And I still teach that. I teach kids today to know your teammates, that you have spots on the floor that you shoot from. You deserve those shots, plus your teammates know you're going to take those shots, and that makes for great offensive rebounders. It's when you're turning down shots or you're taking shots you're not supposed to that usually, nobody on your team can get to the boards. So we teach that emphasis. It also creates balanced scoring. Most kids are happy that way, doing that. So I probably will be coaching many, many years, so I enjoy that a great deal. It makes the winter months go by, but I know that a lot of parents enjoy my coaching style. The parents here at Tomahawk for the freshman girls have just been great supporters, extremely supportive of my philosophy, and the kids play very hard here, so I've enjoyed it here.
Bob, anything you'd like to say before we wrap things up?
Probably, you don't realize that the little things that take place. When I played in high school sports, people don't realize that my grandparents were quite elderly, and that I knew that every game I played in sports, my grandparents were sitting at a radio, and people don't realize that. So those are heart-feeling thoughts. You can tell. So, just a second here. So I think that you have to give credit where the people that are out in the city and that they don't really know what makes some people tick. But parents and grandparents are a great deal.
Former Columbus Dawn sports standout Bob Koch. This is Gene DeLisio reporting for WDLB and WOSQ Sports.